All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Very honored to continue to celebrate Women's History Month with some amazing guests. Between the three of them, and I'll let them introduce themselves. We have three squadron commanders here, senior leaders in the military. For anyone out there who's trying to think, we're about to talk a lot of military stuff. I don't know what's going to happen. How does it translate? Trust us, it does. You're going to hear some amazing insights. All of their opinions are their own, but coming from senior leaders and the things that they've experienced, I think you'll find as the audience that you can draw a lot of these experiences to your life, whether it's civilian life, whether it's sports, whether it's your kids in school, whether it's military, people aspiring to come up into the military. But really, I think that as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month with our YouTube channel, Beyond Labels DEIB Explored, I just want to give a lot of people the opportunity to learn that DEIB is an acronym, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But there are examples of leaders and people who are creating these cultures of inclusion and belonging, and they may not call it DEIB, and that's okay. So let's go ahead and roll right into it. We're going to start the first introduction. I'm going to turn it over to her, Suzie Perry. If you're noticing, she has the same last name as me. She is my wife, and the co-founder of Operation Aspire Group. But I think that, again, her having this job of being a squadron commander to include her peers, Maresa Zorrilla and Jenn Hollock, I think that we've got a lot of amazing experience here, and we look forward to hearing from them. Suzie, can you please introduce yourself in the beginning? And, I'm going to have you just go right into kind of answering that first question, and we're going to do the same for everyone else. But after you're done introducing yourself, can you please tell us what you feel, I would say, Women's History Month, what it means to you, and from a personal perspective, right? Kind of, we've been celebrating this, and I think more awareness is coming on Women's History Month and International Women's Day. You had an amazing post last week, but can you tell us what it means to you personally? Thanks.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me as a guest on your webcast. It's an honor to be here with two of my BFFs from Offutt. These are ladies that I really rely upon and have come to really enjoy their company and the shared experience of being squadron commanders, especially from a reserve standpoint. There are some nuances that come with that. I'll also apologize in advance if I start using a bunch of acronyms because, I'm in the military. I will try to keep that to a minimum. But just as a quick introduction, I'm Suzie Perry. I'm a career intel officer approaching about 19 years of service in the U.S. Air Force. I commissioned through ROTC, through DED 890, whoop, whoop, out at the University of Virginia. I have experience both on the active duty side and then also on the reserve side. From a career standpoint, I've done assignments supporting the Air Operations Center, special operations. I flew on board a surveillance aircraft called the J-STARS, worked on the Joint Staff, also in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intel and Security. And most recently, I am the squadron commander at the 820th Intel Squadron out at Offutt Air Force Base. I also have a civilian career. It's a little bit on hold right now because I'm activated on orders. But on the civilian side, I'm a staff officer and subject matter expert supporting the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intel and Security. I am married to a really awesome and supportive husband. He also happens to be my key spouse. So I think it's really cool that we kind of have multiple levels of being able to support each other in our careers and in our backgrounds. And finally, I am a mother of three little kiddos that both are the joys and chaos in my life. When it comes to Women's History Month and what it means to me, I think there is some recognition of how far the U.S. military and the Air Force has come since I first entered the Air Force some almost 20 years ago. There's recognition of how far we've come and also how far we have to go. I think I read a stat that about 50% of the workforce in the U.S. is women, but I think only about 18% of the active duty military workforce is women. And so what that tells me is there is a bit of a gap there. There's still barriers to entry and retention for getting women as a talent pool in the military. Um, and so that's something that I think my generation of women leaders in the military we're really trying to chip away at. But I will tell you there has been a sea change in terms of representation of women at the senior ranks. I remember when I first took command, and Marisa, you might remember this experience, but when I first took command, we had a change of command at our wing level very shortly thereafter. So our wing is based out of Wright Pat Air Force Base in Ohio. So before a drill weekend, we have a pre unit training assembly meeting. And so we walk into the room because it's an environment at this particular weekend where it's all of the leadership of the wing. I remember looking around the room and thinking, wow, exactly half of the leadership in this room is women. Exactly half of the squadron commanders, exactly half of the group commanders, and then there are other senior enlisted leaders, et cetera. And it's moments like that where I look around and I notice that there is a lot more representation than when I first joined. It's really moving for me, and it's something that I really want to just shout from the mountaintops as like an example of how things have changed. It's just something I want to keep chipping away at in terms of trying to develop recruiting and retention and those types of initiatives in the military.
That's awesome. I think I recall some of the things that you said here as well, Susie, during the meeting, and I want to try to clear it up for some of our audience who might be civilians. But I do remember when you told me about being in that meeting and how many women in senior positions were there. And that's pretty awesome because as our audience knows, I left the military in 2011 and I never had a squadron commander who was a woman. And I knew of some senior woman in the military, but it was nothing where it was just like right there. It was readily seen. You had access to these senior leaders, unlike what you have now, even with Chief Bass, right, who just retired, which is pretty awesome, breaking barriers. But um, just so people understand too, like what does squadron commander mean? Like if you are a civilian and you're watching this, I like to try to relate to some people. It's like almost being like the boss or the CEO of a small company. Because if you think about how many people are in y'all's squadrons, it's like you have people leaders of people leaders of people leaders underneath you. So can you kind of give someone an idea of what a squadron commander is? And then I'd love to like kind of give you all, Jen and Marisa, some thoughts on just being able to explain it to other people too and put it in your own words because I think that'll help some people that are watching.
Right. So I think you actually explained it perfectly. It's like you are the CEO of your own little company. You have each squadron will have a mission that is focused on some aspect of national security and making the Air Force and the DoD run effectively. So you are the leader in charge of the squadron, and then you have a staff. Every squadron's different. You can have as few as in the teens up to in the hundreds numbers of people. But essentially, your purpose is to focus on whatever the mission is assigned to your squadron and make sure that it's a smooth running operation, that people are getting the training and development that they need to meet the needs of their mission. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I don't know if you ladies had anything you wanted to add.
Uh, They they
That
probably
was well
do.
said.
Awesome. Thank you. What I'd love to do then is turn it over to Jen, if I could. And again, just kind of keep it on the theme, Women's History Month. I'd love to hear from your words, your opinion. Like, what does Women's History Month mean to you, Jen?
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. So a little bit about my background. My path is anything but a straight line. I actually enlisted in the Army in 1997. And so I just had my 27th anniversary in uniform last month.
Awesome.
So almost 3 decades here. And everyone asks me when I'm going to retire, and I say when it's not fun anymore. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. This is the best part about what I get to do. Um, so my background too is all intelligence, both on the enlisted and on the officer side. So I spent a lot of years at the National Security Agency and doing other three-letter agency type jobs. And like Susie, also we served in the same unit doing Air Operations Center work, running the air war for the Central Command, the Middle East theater. So that was a lot of fun to get to be in the same unit as a friend of mine. And currently I am the commander of the 52nd Network Warfare Squadron. So a little bit out of my comfort zone, I'm getting some career breadth here out of the intelligence specific community and into the cyber world, which has been a wonderful opportunity for me to learn and grow professionally because it's something that I've never done before. And then thinking about um, Women's History Month. So to kind of circle back to my family, my mom is also a veteran. She did 22 years active duty in the Army, which she enlisted in the 1970s, where that certainly was not the norm. And to do an entire 22-year career in the Army during that time period was uh, looks very different than my time and those coming behind me now. To echo Susie's words exactly, I thought about the same things that she was talking about, that when I first joined the military in the 90s, there was quite a few ladies who were my peers, but no leaders, especially at that period of time. Yeah, it just was not the norm to see women sergeant majors, women colonels or generals. And over the past almost 30 years now, the fact that the three of us are on this call and a lot of my peers are females, but a little bit that we talked about before the interview started was that our squadrons all look different.
Mm.
And just because holistically we're getting more women in positions of leadership, that's not the case at the micro level. So at my squadron, I don't have any senior enlisted leaders or senior NCOs that are females, and there's only one other female officer in my squadron. So there's still
Mm.
work to do, but we've come a long way. And I think that Women's History Month and celebrating that openly and having these types of deliberate conversations is what's going to help keep keep the diversity growing and keep women on the right path towards leadership in the future.
Awesome. I love that, Jen. And I have a question for you for our audience because at any given time, our kids could be watching or anything like that, and their imaginations can run wild here. When you said cyber world, are we talking like cyborgs and things like that? Can you give us an idea of what cyber world means?
Ivan, I would have to kill you if I told you. No,
It's
just kidding.
that cool,
Uh,
huh?
so there's a lot of different cyber missions within the Department of Defense, and what my squadron specifically works on is the defense of our friendly networks. So
Ah.
our Air Force networks have to be protected, and that's what my airmen do. So not probably as cool as you thought I was going to say, but a super important job for national security and keeping airmen all over the world safe so that they can operate and communicate effectively and not have cyber attacks on our own systems. That's the type of stuff we're trying to defend against.
Well, that is very cool, and I appreciate the fact that you don't have to take me out. So,
Uh,
but no, thank you very much. And Marisa, love to ask you the same question. If you could introduce yourself, please, and then give us an idea of what Women's History Month means to you, please.
Sure. I'm Maresa Zorrilla, and I just want to thank you, Ivan, for taking out the time to do this. I'm very honored to do this podcast. And so I'm a full-time squadron commander for the 49th Intelligence Squadron at Offutt Air Force Base. I have been in for almost 20 years. I'm a few months shy of 20. And I've done all kinds of things. I have a pretty broad range of experiences in the Air Force, both active duty and reserve. I started out doing Air Mobility Command aircrew intelligence, which took me around the globe, mostly in the Pacific Theater and in combat zones all over the Middle East. I also did a stint as a Joint Staff at the Pentagon, and then a U.S. Cybercom assignment near Silicon Valley. I also can't tell you what I did for that, or I'll have to kill you.
Oh
And
man.
then, I did some distributed common ground system work at DGS-2 at Beale Air Force Base, California. So that was, we were doing full motion video, medium altitude combat operations. And then I also did a stint with the Space Force. So I was at Vandenberg Space Force Base before I got here, and did some very interesting work in the realm of space there. So my current squadron, our mission is airborne signals intelligence. We have aviators who are also linguists. They know languages fluently. It's a pretty incredible mission. And my airmen have some of the longest training pipelines in the Air Force. So I feel very honored to be their commander. These are highly intelligent airmen, very capable. And honestly, I'm living the dream. This is the best job I've ever had in the Air Force, and I'm so grateful to be in this role. I do have 3 kids, just like Colonel Perry. So I have 3 kids, 7 and under. It is the best job, and also it can be challenging at times, especially as a squadron commander. But to answer your question about what Women's History Month means to me, I think Jen and Susie articulated that very well. So I'll be pretty succinct with my answer. I really do think it's about acknowledging the women that have gone before me, the women who've done some trailblazing throughout history and really allowed me to be where I'm at today and to have the opportunities I have today. But I also think it's about acknowledging that we have some areas in which we need to improve. We still need more equal opportunity for women, particularly for moms and women aviators. So that's something I've learned very recently now that I'm a mom and a female aviator. I'm realizing there's some gaps there that we need to work on. And I think the Air Force is working really hard on it. And I think we're making great progress. So I have taken it upon myself personally to be responsible for ensuring women in the future have it better than I've had it.
That's very, I love that insight. And I think one of the questions I have as well, Marisa, you said that you're full-time, right? Can you, and that reminds me, because the difference between reservist and full-time, me being former military, I have an idea, but just so people understand in our audience, what did you mean by full-time with your description?
Sure. So the Air Force Reserve is a little bit different. We have all the same requirements, the same mission execution requirements, and basic, combat mission readiness requirements. But almost, I think it's about 80% now of the Air Force Reserve is part-time. So the Air Force Reserve is really dependent on the citizen airman concept, where the bulk of our force is part-time. They have civilian jobs like Jen and Susie full-time, and then the reserve commitment is a part-time commitment. So there's challenges on both sides. I think Jen and Susie have it pretty hard as a part-time commander with a full-time civilian job. That's a lot to manage. I don't know how they do it. It's also hard to be a full-time commander when you only have a very small full-time staff to run a squadron day to day. So there's challenges on both ends, but really we make it work. We're making it work. And I am so thankful for these 2 ladies. I have somebody to confide in, to work through the challenges through when it comes to decision making and just making some really hard calls. I have these ladies to lean on, and I'm just very grateful for them.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for describing that. And what I'd love to do in this kind of next set is to kind of switch the order about, and it'll be Jen, Marisa, and Susie speaking. But kind of this next question, Jen, is, as we think about Women's History Month, we think about our audience and, maybe some younger woman in their professional career could be listening to this, or even some girls that are thinking about, well, what do I want to do in high school? STEM? Do I, not like science, technology, engineering, and math? Like it depends, right? Like, and these are some amazing backgrounds of people in front of me, but how do I even get to where they are? Like, who lifted them up? Who championed their cause? Like, can you give us an idea of maybe a person, to whomever it was, that kind of championed you in your career, whether it be early or even now, like right before your squadron commander role, just to be able to say, you know what, I believe in Jen. I'm going to support her.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm almost glad I forgot to mention my family in my intro. So I'm also married to a fellow airman. He's a full-time reservist, and we have a daughter who actually just got married. And so we all live in Washington, D.C., which is nice. My family's all here, my immediate family. And so obviously, number one, they're my number one answer to that question, is that
Hmm.
without the support of my family and then my friends to keep my chin up, because it's not always easy, of
Yeah.
course, taking on new challenges and doing scary things. So that's always going to be my first answer. But then to think about, maybe another female role model, um, and like you mentioned, it doesn't matter whether it's a military career that you're looking forward, or a corporate, or whatever that looks like. There's always going to be those people who serve as mentors and help create paths and give you ideas that maybe you can do something different that you didn't think you maybe were qualified for. But for me, like I mentioned before, the early on I only saw one kind of leader role model in my career, and they were typically a man with a pretty gruff personality. They weren't really friendly. Their answer was going to be no. They were kind of like, a typical what you'd think of an old school like military or even a corporate, CEO, very stern male figure. So the first, yeah, like maybe decade of my career, I was like, oh man, maybe I'm not cut out to be a leader,
Mm.
because that's not who I naturally am, and that's not who I want to be. And I tried it out kind of in the middle ranks a little, like trying to be like a little more stern and gruff than my natural personality. And I thought, like, this is exhausting. Faking who you are all day long and trying to be somebody different. Not only you're not effective, you're exhausted, and you come off as weird because it's not authentic. It's not who you are. And then, lucky for me, early in my captain years, I was lucky enough to work with two female lieutenant colonels. One was my commander and one was my director of operations. And that was the first time I'd had two senior leaders who were both female, and neither of them played into that persona that I just described. They didn't act like somebody who they weren't authentically. They were very effective leaders. They were super smart women who communicated very well, who set very, really great vision and guidelines for our organization for everyone to work towards. But at the same time, they were humble, they were approachable, they were very human. And that was the first time I'd ever worked in an organization like that, where there was a role model, an example of a leader who was more of who I thought I could be like when I grew up.
Hmm.
And I'm happy to say that one of them has gone on to be, she's now a two-star
Wow.
general in the Air Force. So I'm not going to sell her out and tell everyone her name, but she, whether she knows it or not, she was certainly one of my most influential role models and really set the stage for me thinking that I could be bigger than I was then, and I could attain big goals. So
Hmm.
that's yeah, that's something to be said about that representation of other other characteristics other than maybe the old school model of leadership.
Hmm. Oh, that's a great perspective. And, even Susie and I say that about our daughter. Sometimes it takes seeing to believe in it. And so, no, I really appreciate that, because it sounded like it took a while before you had two women who were leaders that you're like, okay, now, wow. And they're like
Yeah, I could
investing my
be
time.
that.
Yeah,
It took a
exactly. So,
decade.
and I'm so glad it's a different environment now. And so, Marisa, I'd love to hear your perspective and your views. Who's kind of championed you? Do you think of any influential woman in your career who has really kind of championed your growth?
Absolutely. So, my first female commander had a pretty tremendous impact on my career. Her name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Reed, retired. So I can sell her out because she's retired now. But just like Jen and Susie mentioned, so when I first entered the Air Force in 2004, it was really rare to see a woman in a senior officer rank, really past major. And it was even rarer to see a female squadron commander. It took years before I even saw one. And then it wasn't until 15 years after I joined that I actually had a female squadron commander. So this was 15 years in. I was a major at the time, and I was the director of operations. And I had been in roles previously where I was the senior ranking officer and the first female officer to lead those organizations, and it was not easy.
Mhm.
So I remember before Sarah took command, I was a little bit nervous, because she had 3 young kids, and I was like, how is she going to manage this? I've never seen this done before. Can this really be done? And I just started taking copious notes, and I was like, whatever she's going to do, I'm going to take notes, to see if this is possible for me. And I just didn't have any examples to go off of, as far as female squadron commanders. But she proved that you can be an incredible and an effective commander and a great mom and take care of yourself and, do all the things. And I remember she would score 100% on her PT test. And I was so inspired by that. Like, how do you do all the things? This is incredible. And she really took care of airmen. She was very, very people oriented. She had her own style of leadership. She took her experience on the civilian side and transferred that over to command. And it was the most people oriented leadership style I'd ever seen. And it was very much her style and not her copying what others have done before. So really, she was one of the best commanders I've ever had. She encouraged me to be authentic and to lead with my heart. And she gave me a gift that I still have on my desk to this day. And on the front, it says, "Be fearlessly authentic." And on the back, in this beautiful cursive writing, is a handwritten note that says, "Continue to lead with your heart. It will always be a strength." And I have taken that with me into command, to lead with my heart. Of course, we have to lead with our head a lot. There's a lot of like logical management stuff that we have to do. But then there's other times where we have these really difficult decisions to make with people. And I have really leaned into that advice she's given me to use that strength that I have for good. And so she really taught me to lean on my own strengths that are different than others. My own leadership style looks different than everyone else's. I don't have to be a carbon copy of other leaders that have gone before me. And I can be a real champion for people, treat people well, be authentically female. I don't need to hide that about myself. I can lean into my identity as a mom. I think being a mom has made me better leader, actually. And I can be who I am and still be a very effective senior military leader.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I love that quote. I wrote it down, "Be fearlessly authentic." So that's awesome. And so Suzie, love to be able to hear your thoughts, just kind of continuing with Women's History Month and just thinking about a role model, a champion, a woman who in your career has just lifted you up and said, you're ready for this.
Right. So when I first thought about this question, the first person that came to my mind is someone that you remember. So Colonel Kim Sievers. She was my first example in the United States Air Force of, if you see it, you can be it. So my first assignment coming out of intel school was, I went as a butter bar, so that's a second lieutenant, and I deployed to the KOC at Al Udeid for a year. And my boss at the time was Colonel Kim Sievers. She was what was known at the time as CENTAF. She was the Central Air Force's A2, or Director of Operations. And she was the perfect example to me of just steadfast leadership while still maintaining that bit of heart and a focus on making sure that airmen were taken care of. I remember she went out of her way to forward deploy, to travel out into theater. So, into Iraq, into Afghanistan. She wanted to meet airmen. She wanted to hear about their worries, their concerns, their issues, both professionally and personally. And she just was a really authentic leader. And to me, I always think about how at the time she was deployed for a year. She had 2 young daughters at home. And so just really being able to balance being a mom and being a leader, a senior leader in the Air Force, was a really awesome example to me. Which leads me into kind of like a more recent mentor that I've had. I met this mentor at the exact same time. I was a butter bar. She was a captain. She actually took my job as Colonel Sievers' exec when I left Al Udeid. But Colonel Nikki Rucker, and babe, you know her too, because she followed me, or not followed me, she appeared several years ago at the Pentagon in my office one day. And I looked at her and I was like, I know you. And she looked at me and said, I know you. And we did the walk down memory lane and figured out, oh yeah, we knew each other at the KAOC. But since then, a couple years ago, Colonel Rucker has become my friend, my confidant. I lean on her for her experience when she was a squadron commander, for advice on all the little things that happen in a squadron where you're like, this again, how can this be happening? But she has that like institutional experienced knowledge of how to handle situations, and she really puts things into perspective for me. And so I would say she's not only my wingman, but she's also been kind of like my spiritual warrior. She has been a really good guide for me in my faith and trying to be able to marry up my professional experiences and then, what I believe in my faith and how that can ground me and give me strength in how I pursue, the way that I lead my airmen. Um, so yeah, I gave 2, so you got a bonus.
Hey, I appreciate that. And Colonel Sievers, you're right. I do remember her because I was in Afghanistan when she visited where we were, and the amount of respect I had for her as an '06 colonel coming out and traveling planes, trains, automobiles all over Afghanistan. And she gave me like this kind of stern look, I thought, and I was like, oh man, oh no, there's a Intel officer '06 kind of stepping into our little hut over here. This is going to be rough, but her authenticity, how genuine she was in her approach, and even my airman that I had with me at the time, uh, the respect that I had for her and just the way she led by example was awesome. So thank you for that. And now, kind of the last set of questions here. I'd love to start with you, Marisa, if we could, because you actually touched on it in your example, but you mentioned your leadership style. And so as we kind of think about all of you as squadron commanders, and again, for the civilians who are listening to this, imagine like they're CEOs essentially of like companies. They have to set the vision, the culture. They have to kind of bring about their leadership philosophy and kind of rally everyone towards it. So Marisa, I'd love to hear kind of like your leadership philosophy and kind of how, we call it DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we don't have to use those specific words. But I'm sure there's a lot of inclusive behavior or ways that you create an environment where people feel like they belong. Can you tell us about your leadership philosophy with your squadron, please?
Sure. So I said it in my change of command ceremony, was assumption of command ceremony, that I want my squadron to be a haven of diversity and inclusion. I really meant that. And so it's been part of my, commander expectations to the squadron, and every opportunity I have to make everyone feel valued. I really take that to heart. It's a pretty central component of my leadership philosophy. And really, I think diversity is what helps make the Air Force what it is. I think we are the world's greatest Air Force. And part of that is we have people from all walks of life with a common purpose to execute the same mission. And I really think the unique experiences and leadership perspectives, and then you get the total force, the reserve component piece to it, because we have citizen airmen bringing civilian expertise into military operations. I think that's what makes us better. We solve problems faster, we innovate more. And for my squadron in particular, we have pretty good diversity when it comes to religion and gender, gender diversity and diversity of thought. My airmen have to think very differently to do the work they do, to be able to know a completely different, foreign language, and then apply that to operations on a military aircraft, which are very intense. To be able to do that, you have to have a different way of thinking. And so I have learned a lot from my airmen and just the diversity of thought and how valuable that is. And so for me, DEI is about valuing the differences, but also identifying similarities. Because even though we are very different, there are common, commonalities that we have, and that's what really brings us together. And I think the sameness often gets overlooked when we focus so much on the differences. I think both are important. And, finally, I want to say that to me, inclusion is really the evidence that we value individual differences and identify similarities.
I love that. And I can't begin to imagine what it's like to be a linguist because I am half Korean, as you know, and so is my wife, and I don't speak Korean. So I can't imagine what it's like having to translate all that on board an aircraft. And as I understand it, too, you're aircrew trained, aren't you?
That is correct. So yeah, I went through about 5.5 months of training for both the aircrew piece and then the mission piece. My airmen go through about 36 months of training altogether. So it's quite a bit. And yeah, like again, you learn a totally different way of thinking, but I think it makes the Air Force so much better. My airmen are not afraid to push the envelope and to think outside the box and to question certain policies and guidance, and I've learned to really value and appreciate that.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And um, Susie, love to hear your thoughts. Again, just continue on this theme, your leadership philosophy, how diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging kind of folds into that.
Right. So I would say my approach is about servant leadership. It has a lot to do with what can I do to make my airmen into the best possible versions of themselves, whether that be personally or professionally. I joke that I'm a bleeding heart squadron commander. And I say that jokingly, but there is a bit of truth there. I think airmen understand when you care about them. And if your focus is only on, the day-to-day things of making a squadron run, that's all well and good. You can be completely successful in doing that. But the airmen are really going to work their hardest and pour their hearts and souls into their mission if they think that they have leadership in a support network that cares about them and that's going to help develop and buttress them and move them forward. The something that the Air Force Reserve Command is pushing right now, which I very much believe in, is that DEI is a talent management issue. So, we have to think about what does each individual person need to be successful, and then I as a leader need to know how can I create kind of bespoke developmental opportunities for these airmen to be successful in their goals. And I think my role is to help airmen to realize what their inherent value and worth is, and then to bring to light their individual talents so that they can be open and creative and find ways to solve problems and hack the mish, as they
Mhm.
say.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And um, talent management, that might be a good word that our audience would know, right? It translates very easily, I guess, now, and me learning something new, military over into civilian world, where human resources now more associated with people and the word talent, trying to move away from the word human resources because of people thinking, well, that's budgeting, that's payroll. Um, and I do think that talent management is a very interesting way to see it. And so I love that viewpoint. And, you know, um, Jen, bringing it in strong. The last one, here we go. Loved your insight and, the conversations we've had so far. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on like your leadership philosophy and how diversity, equity, inclusion kind of fall into that.
So luckily, I got hired by a boss into this job that he told me that I was allowed to basically run fast with scissors and break things. So that's exactly what I was looking for. That's the kind of challenge I want. So I feel like as a leader, that's my job. I've spent all these years to get the shiny epaulets on my collar. So I'm going to go use them for good and not for
Mhm.
evil. So my approach is to always clear barriers so that the smart guys who work for me can get the job done in the most effective way for our mission and for our Air Force. And so that's always my philosophy and the way I take approach to things. And it's taken me a lot of years professional maturation to get to this point, to be able to say that here's, kind of where it ties into DEI for me, that there's a lot of ways to do something correct and probably only a small handful of ways that are actually wrong. And just because it's not the way I would have done it naturally doesn't make it wrong. So that took decades to be able to recognize that as a leader, and to not want to micromanage people, and to value that diversity of thought of people who aren't the way I am naturally, and to value not only their inputs, but to see that maybe their way is better. That's not a natural, I think, human tendency, and something that takes a while to develop as a leader, to not just shut people down who are different for any reason, just even in the way they think about things. So I think that is probably my number one kind of thing in my mind as a leader when I'm thinking about inclusion and diversity of thought and inclusion, is to talk less and to listen more, which is also difficult for a type A running with scissors type of person. So that's my advice to anyone else too, who's, whether you're a leader of a small team or a big team, is to kind of, give your vision, give your end goal that you want your team to get to, but then get out of their way and let them do it, even if it doesn't look exactly like you, because more than likely you're going to end up with a better product at the end if there is diversity of thought going into that process, and not just me. And the other thing I always say is that, all of us is always smarter than one of us.
Mhm.
Or, none of us, the inverse is true. None of us is smarter than all of us.
Mhm.
So
Awesome. Well, I do appreciate that. And, um, as we kind of conclude this conversation and this webcast, I do think that this whole premise of the webcast is just thinking about beyond labels, DEIB Explored. And the reason why we're doing it here is because um, we've seen what labels can do, and sometimes the negative perception of a label, or people looking at someone and thinking one way versus just having a conversation, being curious, getting some insight, learning, educating themselves, and understanding that maybe their labels might be wrong. Their frame of thinking might be incorrect, or they just need a little bit of reframing. I think with this space, it's great to be able to learn from so many different perspectives. I'm fortunate that I had three people on here to get to hear different philosophies and threads that tie it all together, especially with you all being squadron commanders, but also think about the nuances of each of you having leadership over different squadrons with different missions, and what diversity, equity, inclusion means to those different squadrons. So, that's pretty awesome. What I would say to the community and everyone who's watching, you don't have to be a commander in the military to appreciate the fact that diversity, equity, inclusion is everywhere, right? And I'm just hopeful for the future. We have a daughter, uh, and the look that she gives Susie, seeing that my mom is a squadron commander, that's her norm. We grew up thinking, what? Now her norm is seeing women who are squadron commanders, and hopefully just this whole idea of, whether you see diversity at these leadership positions in the military or in corporate, it just becomes an afterthought because that was such a thing of the past. So to everyone who is watching, I want to just say thank you so much to Jenn, Marisa, and Susie. And when I think about all the things that you all continue to do for just the nation, but also for, in a more micro level, just your squadrons and your families. Just a huge thanks, especially for Women's History Month. And because I am a bit neurodiverse, I want to say this to my audience who's listening. There are a lot of books behind me, and it's actually intentional that I did that, in case people, and even Marisa and Jen, in case anybody's wondering. But Susie and I, we read a lot, and there are some amazing, influential women who are authors and biographies that are out there. And I just encourage people, just in the same thought of learning and educating yourselves and being curious. I think leaders are readers. And so as you kind of continue to think about your growth and your development, diversity, equity, inclusion, you can reach out to us at any time. As my kids would say, please, Dad, tell them, like and subscribe, and something about a description below, but I don't remember what it is, so they can educate me for the next one. But thank you all for listening. Lots of love. And thank you so much, Maresa, Jenn, Suzie. Everyone have a nice day.